Is that still fresh? Sorry. Yeah.
Sure.
Just trying to create a tension in the room.
No, and that's why I did want to verbalize that there were things in this ODP, which again, I wasn't part of creating,
Sure.
that I acknowledge I feel are hypocritical to other decisions we've made.
Right, and so my thought is, if we are gonna oppose, you know, what we did at 101st and Riverside because of the apartment issue, let's keep that same energy with this, is what, let's, and so,
Yeah, I respect that. That's why I didn't want to come to the table and pretend being like, well, this is fine, and that it wasn't like actually a pretty similar comparison.
all right, or we can revisit. Okay, I've talked long enough. Counselor Dustin?
Yeah, thanks for that, Counselor. It was I that made that comment, by the way, as if none of us knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. It's a good thing she found a barn to have a baby, that's all I can say. Yeah,
It is, I agree.
they at least were able to birth the baby, so.
Let's move on.
Anyway, my understanding also is there's a sewer line that's going to be replaced as well in the project.
There would be a required extension.
Yeah,
The-
okay.
The lot is not currently served by sanitary sewer, so that came up as a point of even just replacing a single home, because the one home has already been demolished. There would be likely a requirement anyway to extend the sanitary sewer, which would be quite cost prohibitive for just one single-family home to be built on this lot. It contributed to the developer's desire to try and find other options for what he could do.
And all the other utilities are already
Yeah, water is
available
available, and
on site,
drainage would be determined at a time when he comes in with his actual plat for the property.
right? And that would have to be determined prior to the building, correct?
Yeah, this goes back to where I was hearing a lot of neighborhood concerns about things that really have to happen in the permitting process, and if something does cause these types of issues of concern, then
Yeah,
we'll be able to build it.
Well, they have to be addressed.
Yeah, they have to be addressed.
Mitigated.
And
Yep.
you guys, I mean, you know this because you hear it all the time, but it's a real chicken and egg situation with a zoning request often, because a developer or property owner who's seeking to do something like this is often a little reluctant to go and spend the money to engineer, design, and come up with some of the plans that would be required for permitting without any assurance that these could actually be permitted. And so we get that conversation happening at planning commission very often, where they, you know, they have a conceptual layout that they would like, and that's their desire. But there's certainly possibilities that when this starts a permitting process, that other requirements that kick in will result in changes, could reduce the density of what would be allowed here based on where drainage may have to go. But it is something that's a little bit of an unknown at the zoning step, because of the fact that nobody's out there doing the engineering until they know that they can actually develop something, so.
That was it.
Counselor Bangle?
If I remember correctly in the video, somebody showed a display or a parking, and it was happening on both sides of that narrow street.
Yes.
So that's obviously a concern.
I
that
was
you
told by
wouldn't be
neighbors that
able
was
to
during a
have-
party, and I've driven on that street a few times. That is not the norm.
Okay, so is parking allowed on both sides of the street, or should there
Yes,
be
but which-
prohibited parking on one side?
When that was stated as a solution to that potential challenge by the planning commission, a lot of neighbors were very upset and said, "You're threatening us with that."
There
And
was-
so that
so
seemed
the-
to not be a popular solution, despite that being the solution on a narrow
I think
street.
that was my biggest challenge with it, and that was really something that I thought was, that picture was more impactful to me than any of the
Yes.
other arguments.
I think that there is, I mean, the neighbors who are on the street today are utilizing on-street parking very often. And, yeah, as Councilor Bella said, you know, I suggested, would it be helpful if the city went and said no parking on one side to
Right.
ensure, and the neighborhood was absolutely opposed to that, because they want to be able to park along that street. And I think the developer's response was, he has no intent of having people on the street because he is incorporating his own parking solution on site. But it was heavily resisted by the existing
Yeah.
residents for us to go in and actually say you can't park on one side.
Which in older neighborhoods like this is pretty, you know, like Maple Ridge or other neighborhoods have had, because they're just older, the streets narrower, they do have that no parking on one side. This neighborhood just didn't seem to like that. But I have since it's so close to the grocery store, I've driven that street a lot subsequent and prior to that meeting, and I've never seen it parked like that.
How challenging would it be for for our public safety folks to get down that street if there is parking on both sides? Because you
Yeah.
can never, with families the way they are, properties changing hands, you could have families that have multiple
Yeah.
drivers in a household. What today, there's not a car there today, and now you have another car parked on that. I'm really challenged where we have narrow streets.
We should
And
do
I
it.
do agree that prohibiting multifamily in, as part of an ODP, I'm not agreeable to, especially when we have other parts of the city where that stuff's being built.
Yeah.
Keep saying we don't want concentration of poverty, but we keep still doing it in our planning. So I just want to make sure the public safety piece is the most important to me. And that picture was so impactful to me because if that street is as narrow as it is and we add more traffic and if I remember correctly, in listening to this is at the end of a dead end.
Yes.
So that's troublesome for me. How are we gonna deal with this as part of this plan?
Yeah, which I would personally, like, again, the neighbors expressed concern, but even today, right, it's already an issue, or they mentioned, this did come up about, I think it might have been like, trash truck needing to back down the street
So
as
I'm
is.
opposed just off the public safety aspect.
Yeah, which I think separate, of the whole thing, it probably should be parking on one side. It really is at that time, I'm not saying that the neighbors have to be amenable to it, if it really is just a public safety issue overall, but they were very vehemently against that. Granted, though, to me, if we could, especially with the on-site parking, if this creates an opportunity for someone to actually genuinely turn around, that's also appealing. Paired with, you're right, though, if it's really necessary for vehicles to get through, to have no parking on one side, which has definitely happened in many other older and historic neighborhoods, then that's what's needed, separate from this even.
So this street, and Nathan, do you know the width of this street? It's a pretty narrow street, but I went down the street maybe a week or two after the TMAPC public hearing on what I consider kind of a normal part of a day, say maybe late morning, early afternoon on a Saturday, no one was on the street.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's common, but it can happen. People have the right to park
Yep.
on the street.
Yeah, so I
One
think,
thing that was brought up too, and addressed was, at some point, there was, there previously had been signage posted that this was a dead end and that there was no outlet. And people had said that sign had gone away, something had happened, the sign had gotten taken down, and that had led people, if you go back to the aerial photo, so the Broken Arrow Expressway exits north of this property.
Need to go back further.
Is there a farther out aerial? It's harder to see, but you can see the off-ramp from the Broken Arrow Expressway dumps right there onto Atlanta in the neighborhood.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
the neighbors
Which is
had
an issue.
expressed that folks had been exiting, coming down Atlanta, and then turning down 16th, not realizing that that was a dead end, thinking it was going to be a through street, which was leading to more congestion. And upon hearing that, we reached out to Public Works ahead of the Planning Commission meeting, and they immediately went back out, replaced the dead end sign to make sure that it was properly signed to say, you can't, there's no outlet here, don't come down this street. So that's probably beneficial as well, to avoid at least extra traffic making their way down that dead end. I think that the street itself was roughly like 22 to 23 feet wide, whereas a standard residential street's generally about 26 feet wide. So it is narrower than a standard residential street. But in that picture, another note I think was that a lot of those cars weren't really parked as you would off of, the side of a street. A lot of them were parked in the street, which is a problem in and of
And it's
itself.
not curb and gutter, I think, right?
Right, there's no curb, and so a lot of them were still on the pavement surface, but, I think that was a unique situation just based on,
I don't know. I think the public safety aspect of it just challenges me.
yeah, that's what I do agree that, like, if ultimately, I think that's like a separate traffic engineering thing of making sure that if we really, like, need to put no parking on one side, that's just what needs to happen. I will name with, like, the hypothetical of, like, additional traffic to this, again, by right, he could do 5 right now, adding 1 more, to be, it's like, when we hear things like, oh, there could be 10 to 12 more cars, like, on average, we know that's not exactly how many cars will show up with each of these properties, but also the concept of traffic related to that, it's not like everyone comes and goes at the exact same time every day, and this is already, like, well, I understand it's a dead end, so it's been, like, a quieter street, I don't think this would make it like significantly more crowded, you know, it's still a dead end at the end of the day, so you're not gonna have through traffic, especially with the sign back up. My other thought is, you know, there, again, it's right by 15th and Lewis, it's not exactly like a undense, like rural area, so.
Thank you.
But, as a last note though, if people are concerned about things that are like, don't seem aligned with how we've like voted in the past in the ODP or inconsistent, I know that is something that we could either seek to, I guess, revise, like, can we, I'm trying to think, we could either, revise that prior to it coming to the 5 o'clock, or that is something we are actually able to change and take a vote on during a 5 o'clock meeting.
And that's the other challenge to me in this
Yeah.
RM. We're zoning at RM, but we're baking in an exemption for multifamily. That's challenging to me.
I agree, it's, yeah. Well, and that's, yeah, to me, that's why I'm, again, this was something that I really appreciate how much the developer went above and beyond to collaborate with the neighborhood, and I understand how he arrived at these points. I just like, I actually really, like, was like, hey, he's actually doing all of the compromising, et cetera. I like, you know, attended one of those meetings, have engaged with the neighborhood association a lot around it, but didn't feel the need to be in the midst of it, and then when the ODP came forward, I was like, whew, you know, I could see how he came to these two kind of compromise concessions with the neighbors, but you know, that is something the council can choose to change, especially given that, you know, it would be hypocritical to past decisions we've made, so, and I'm not against that.
So there's discussions about him choosing RS5 instead of RM2, and I don't think it would really make a difference for him.
I don't think so. So RS5 allows cottage homes as well, so he wouldn't have to go all the way to RM2. But the interesting piece of that is that you can get a higher density of single-family lots in an RS5 than you can in RM2. So theoretically, you could plat it into more single-family home lots than you would if you get the RM2 with the optional development plan. It's a little bit of a nuance in our code where RS5 reduces lot sizes down to like 30-foot wide, 3,300 square feet lots. And so if he were to subdivide it, he would get more density than he could under the current proposal. And that was why I think the planning commission ultimately said, you know, we're okay with the RM2 with the development plan. I think there are, you know, there's some distinctions here between the 101st and Florence case as well. One being that the larger tract that we talked about at 101st and Florence, one had direct access to an arterial street, primary arterial street, where apartments often do make more sense because of their ability to access that street. Apartments on a dead-end street where we do have some concerns about safety and traffic and things like that is maybe a situation where I think the developer, one, didn't have a desire to do apartments, and that's why he went ahead and excluded them in his development plan, but two, it's why we were supportive of him creating that development plan for that purpose, so.
Okay, that's a helpful nuance.
Well, thank you.
I think.
So we'll go Lakin, Dutton, and then I have a comment as well, unless someone wants to speak, but Councilor Lakin.
Yeah, I would just say that ODPs have a place, you know, they really are useful tools so that we can create compromises between developers who are trying to do one set of things and neighbors who have lived in those areas who expect or want another set of things. So I'll continue to be supportive of ODPs and supportive of the roles that we as counselors have in trying to negotiate compromises that, in this case, yeah, there is going to be greater density than what we have. Could there be more density? Yes, but that would be maybe detrimental to the neighborhood. So, you know, I'm grateful that the neighborhood and the developer have come together and have created what appears to be a solution. So I think I've always supported these kinds of cases. I know we came to a good compromise at 36th and Yale. I thought we had a good compromise at 101st and Florence. But, you know, I don't have anything that would cause me to not move forward with this at this point. And I do support at least what's been put on the table relating to the compromise that's been created, so.
All right, and Councilor Dutton.
Yeah, so I know that there was mention of two-story and not wanting windows and whatnot, but the way I see this, I mean, they're really not going to be having access to sight of people's backyards from how I see this. So I don't know why that would even be an issue.
I think that's just one of those things that gives people reassurance per, you know, like, you're right, but that's like a common one that ends up in a lot of two-story things in
Well, and it
existing
makes me think that he
neighborhoods.
could easily stack and have more living space density than what is proposed with just the 6 that he's already got. I mean, they could
So, I
easily
mean,
stack that.
part of the development plan, one does establish greater setbacks that I think were something added after the discussion about second-story window provisions. So the RM2 district, you know, by right would allow a 10-foot setback. He has opted to increase that to 20 feet on his west side and 40 feet from the southern boundary. And I think that it was just a timing thing. When the initial concept was being put together, he said, yeah, I'm willing to put in this, you know, restriction on second-story windows to assure that the privacy is kept for those neighbors that are most adjacent to the property. But then we did increase the setbacks as well. So it doesn't necessarily prohibit entirely like them having, you know, a full window on a second story. It just is that the type of window would have to be this translucent material that allows light but not vision through it. And he was agreeable to that, but it is, you know, it's a component that I think he gave as another compromise to say, you know, I'm willing to do that if that's what the neighbors want to ensure that they are comfortable with what I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay.
And so the culverts would probably be filled, sidewalks and curbs.
He would, sidewalks would be, well, you know, because it's a street without curb and gutter, I guess it will depend on what the requirements for his own stormwater purposes are. I mean, there's a possibility that there's a requirement he put in a new storm sewer that does require some improvements in the right of way. But typically on a street without curb and gutter, those are when sidewalks do not kick in, so.
Okay. Yeah, I think you kind of answered or addressed my issue a little bit. As I read through the letters, a lot of folks are expressing issues or the potential for flooding or pooling of water, and so, stormwater infrastructure will be important. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Please.
No, just to kind of put a big button on this one, yeah, this is, as I acknowledge, you know, and I know we all end up with these types of rezonings where there's a lot of contention, a lot of concern from neighbors, and, you know, I just want to name that I definitely tried my best to alleviate what concerns I could while respecting, like, hey, this person already has, by right, could do a lot on this property that could cause a lot of the same concerns, or, you know, trying to instill that there was like a, you know, with different checks and balances, especially with the permitting process, which to me just, I think also offers an opportunity for us more broadly to figure out ways that we can make it more clear to neighbors what happens in zoning versus in permitting, because I think, I'm just naming that as like a lesson learned, because it was hard to offer assurances or have them be like, oh, this happens, and then what else could happen when I'm like, no, permitting will cover these things, so if, like, there's a way we could better communicate or be transparent around that in the future. And then I did want to acknowledge, like, I appreciate what Councilor Lakin said, and that's why I wanted to, like, come to you all as my colleagues related to the ODP. Like, I don't feel dead set about what happens next with it. I do agree there's this push and pull of, like, a compromise was reached between community and developer, to some level. You know, I know not everyone's happy, but, you know, I think they did a lot of good push and pull, while also acknowledging that it includes parts that are hypocritical to decisions we've made in the past. I don't actually feel dead set on how that turns out, but I'm, like, open to continued conversation on that, while I also don't want to hold up or belabor a rezone, so.
Councilor Hall Harper.
So you said that by right now, the way it's currently zoned, he could do more than what he's proposing
He
in
could
a
do-
zone change.
He could do, no, he could do 5 but not 6, but he would not be required to include the amount of parking he would have, and he could also, like, have less green space, and, like, I'll leave it, hold on,
So
Nathan
what's
might
the
be able to
purpose,
describe
what's the
it.
purpose of the zone change then, if
Well,
he
the
can already
zone,
do
so
what he
it's
wants to do?
twofold. One is he does get an additional unit with the change of zoning, so
Okay.
he's increasing by 1 unit. But he's also changing the layout, so if you go back to the site plan, Susan, from what would be a standard subdivision if he did it by right today, which would include an extension of a street into the property and a cul-de-sac, and then you would have individual lots around the cul-de-sac, everybody with their own driveway for their
Some
own
more
parking space,
concrete, yeah.
to allow him instead to consolidate the parking into one area of the property and to essentially round a courtyard with the dwelling units. So the cottage house development allows you to do these multiple detached houses on one lot rather than subdividing into a full subdivision, which requires frontage on a street. So I think that the takeaway from that was that he was ultimately kind of reducing the amount of pavement that would be needed for the purposes of subdividing. And really getting one more unit, and that's what the zoning change is allowing him to do.
So did he have an original proposal that had the cul-de-sacs in the,
I haven't seen one, no.
okay,
but
so
I
he
saw-
never came in with something, or that he wanted to build an apartment complex? That
No,
was
the
never on the
most
table.
density I saw him propose at one point was like, when he was like, oh, maybe I could, because he was like, oh, I was looking at 8 to 10, or I think I even heard a higher number from his original proposal, which I always, like, that is the I reach our neighbors, I'm like, the feasibility of some of that seems minimal. But he was looking at kind of more like duplexes or different things, and then, but he really did come in off the bat talking to the neighbors about just wanting to develop the property without, he wasn't dead set on the outcome. Like, he really, like, over time took the feedback, was like, here's where I'm arriving at, that makes it feasible and affordable for me to build, that addresses concerns. But he never, like, had, like, he was never planning, like, a apartment complex or anything like that. The highest density I saw from him were more kind of like a duplex townhome style thing that had some more units than this, but he landed at the cottage court.
Counselor Hall Harper, anything else?
I'm done.
We have Lakin, Counselor Dutton, and then Counselor Bangle.
I'll just say one thing real quick that I forgot to say in the last thing. ODP is great because at least you know what you're gonna get, and the neighbors know what they're gonna get. Where if you just rezone it, you could end up with something that you really don't want or didn't expect. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Dutton.
Yeah, that's good to know. I was wondering if he had any plans on lot splits.
Not that he ever
Like,
provided.
would he be able to split where the development is, that lot?
No,
create
so
two lots?
the cottage house classification would basically say these are all on one lot.
Okay.
So that would leave it all as one property, and that's what he stated as his desire, is to keep it all as one property. It's a little unique because of the way that it funnels up to the street. He has very limited frontage on the street right now. So this allows him to utilize that minimal frontage and still obtain the amount of units without significant amounts of new paving and stuff for the street.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Counselor Bangle.
I still would like to see what the plan is to deal with the public safety piece of it. Because this is, if this isn't curb and gutter, and they're opposed to no parking on one side of the street, I want to know how we're gonna deal with that. That's problematic.
I mean, I think the reality for your point is that maybe it needs to
Just take the
no
cars
parking
away.
on one side of the street right now. Or what
I
was,
mean,
sorry, what
I
was
don't
your?
know what that
Just
solution is, because
Plow
like
it.
Phil said, the ODP is great, but
Yeah,
we have to deal with all of this, and that one picture, like I said previously, was just impactful to me with two cars. I'm like, I don't know that you could fit a fire truck between those two cars. So,
Yeah.
to me, we have to have a solution for that, in my opinion.
And I also think to myself, where is the trash can? Like, if it's all, kind of a community space, maybe he just has one big trash can that the guy comes in and puts into the back.
Dumpster.
yeah.
And,
Yeah, likely a dumpster.
maybe it goes here, and it's,
He has a bunch of options.
yeah,
I thought that was all supposed to
It
be
doesn't have to
fenced
stay.
in.
It will have to be. I mean, he would have to include dumpster enclosures as well, so if he incorporates them, say, at the end of the drive, they are required to be fenced in, screened, gated, to avoid any situation like that. Now, what I will say about this layout is, you know, as we talked about before, as he starts to go through design and he starts to learn, oh, you need a stormwater, you know, easement or something that might change, this layout could flex. I mean, these lots could, or these units could move around to incorporate some of that additional infrastructure, or those trash enclosures, whatever that might be. But all those things would be addressed as he was going through the permitting process.
Thank you so much, Nathan.
Of course.
Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye to Nathan and Susan? Thank you all so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, item number 5, item number 4. Ordinance amending the fiscal year 24-25 budget to make supplemental appropriations of $20,900 recognized from grant revenues to be received from Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations with the Internet Crimes Against Child Subfund. And
Sir,
All
Jared
right.
Moore from Budget.
Jared Moore is
Good morning.
here.
This is just appropriating a pass-through grant of $20,900 coming from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention at the federal level, being passed through the OSBI to the police department, and it will be used for equipment and training, specifically sending 3 detectives to training for the travel and fees paid, network devices for forensic storage, and monitors and cameras for mobile interviews.
All right, any questions?
Is this
Councilor
mostly
Gilbert?
with the spider
Please, Go
unit?
ahead.
Or is it with the child endangerment?
Child
unit?
endangerment, the
Okay.
cybercrime unit will be, I skipped that, but yeah, the crimes against children.
Right, okay, so it'll be a joint effort,
I
I assume.
believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Counselor Dutton?
Excuse me, how many are currently on this?
Like police officers.
In this particular
Could not
crimes
answer.
against child area?
Oh.
So they're gonna add 3 more.
No, they're not
No.
adding
Oh.
staff, this is
No.
simply training funding and
Okay.
equipment funding.
Oh, for the 3
officers we
existing.
already-
Okay,
And I don't wanna say there's only 3 officers.
Right.
I'm just saying that there's enough funding to send 3 officers to training.
gotcha. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right, anyone else?
Your sleeves off?
Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank you.
All right, item number 5, presentation by and discussion with city staff and bond counsel regarding an overview of municipal bonds, the process and timeline for issuing revenue bonds and other advanced funding or financing options available to local governments and authorities for the IoT housing funds. I see Chad back there. Sarah, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I'll just start real fast and then Chad's gonna do most of it. So, this is, how we've broken up our housing discussions on Improve Our Tulsa 3 into, little mini discussions. Today's focus is on bonds. So you'll remember in the resolution that council passed last November, it was anticipated and budgeted for that we could, if the council elected to, bond a portion of that money. 35 million is what that estimate was based on at the time. And so, today, Chad's gonna review just the process for bonding, how that works with the city and the city's, kind of legal ability, to not take on debt and what mechanisms we use, in order to do that. And then go through a few, so the bonding decision has trade-offs, right? So you can advance money, but it does cost money and process to get there. And so making sure everybody has an understanding of that. And then in our prior conversations, everybody's also talked about what are other options outside of bonds to advance funds. And so we also have experts here who can talk us through what that process would look like if those options were available, so. Here you go.
Good morning. Chad Becker from Treasury, here to talk about something other than the sinking fund today.
But real quick, do you know the numbers so we can make sure?
I didn't look at it.
Okay.
sorry. And I'm joined by our esteemed bond counsel, John Weidman. Esteemed, yes. So, as Sarah said, I'm just gonna hit on a few slides here that will touch on the traditional route that we've gone for issuing bonds within the city for projects of this type. Timelines, milestones, costs, and then I particularly, John will weigh in at any point to course correct me if I get off course, but really the alternative funding and financing options I invited John to speak on because those are not traditional routes that the city goes, but certainly there are options available. I know that council will likely be interested in those. So first slide is titled Revenue Bond Overview. And traditionally, to fund projects like housing, we would go the route of revenue bonds as opposed to general obligation bonds, which council should be familiar with. So revenue bonds, as you can see on the slide here, have a specific revenue source that's pledged and used to repay the debt obligations. These would be more familiar to council in terms of the bonds that we issue for TMUA, or the water and sewer projects, which council approves. and has recently approved. Also, we issue stormwater bonds through the Tulsa Public Facilities Authority. And again, those are all bonds that are repaid and supported through a pledge of revenue by the facility, the enterprise, or the system being financed. So for TMUA, utility revenues are the repayment source for the debt service on those bonds. Vision bonds would be something that would be familiar to council as well. That is more specifically the type of revenue bond that we've issued in the past for these advanced funding projects where sales tax revenue is pledged in repayment for the bonds. And in the past, we've also utilized revenue bonds for parking lots as well. So just different types of revenue bonds that some counselors who've been on council for a while have seen in the past, and an overview for those that are newer to council. One of the somewhat unique features of revenue bonds that differs them from the general obligation bonds is that we do not have to go out to a vote of the citizens to authorize the indebtedness. We generally, historically, on our bond issuances do a competitive sale, but council can waive that competitive sale requirement by 3/4 of a vote, and that waiver would also have to come by the authority that's issuing the bonds as well. Discussion of revenue bonds, we really do have to have a high-level discussion of public trust because, as Sarah mentioned, and with the general obligation bonds, the city can't take on debt, or because of our annual budgetary pledge. So we utilize our public trusts and authorities to issue debt and specifically issue these revenue bonds. So the public trusts have been created to issue obligations and provide funds for the furtherance of their public purpose for their beneficiaries. The public trusts, such as TMUA, TPFA, are legal entities that are separate and apart from their beneficiary, which in this case the beneficiary is the city. The public trust debt and the authority to issue the obligations are not those of the city. So that's how these trusts work to give us or the city the ability to issue bonds and take on the debt that's not technically that debt of the city. The public trusts of the city, I've listed a couple there. TMUA and TPFA, again, I've mentioned, are the ones that we most frequently issue, or the debt is issued, the revenue bond debt is issued, is the issuer of the revenue bond debt. So you see there, TMUA issues the water and sewer revenue bonds. We do, from time to time, take on notes through the Oklahoma Water Resources Board through TMUA, and then anytime there are opportunities to refinance those bonds, when the rate environment lends itself to it, we can refinance or refund those bonds. TPFA handles, or was the issuing entity for the lease revenue bonds, which helped us, or allowed us to acquire this building. The vision bonds, which were issued several years ago, and were also advanced sales tax funding bonds, were issued under TPFA. Stormwater bonds, the parking bonds that I mentioned, and then also the same refunding or refinancing opportunities as they come along, TPFA participates in. Mentioned on an earlier slide that the city generally, when we sell bonds, we do that through a competitive sale. That's required when the beneficiary is a county or a municipality, with some exceptions. Competitive sale is the preferred method of the city of Tulsa. With our credit rating being so strong, we generally have lots of success when we go out to the market and sell the bonds competitively. It does require a strong revenue source, such as the ad valorem or property tax that is the repayment stream for general obligation bonds, and then the sales tax revenues or utility/system revenues that accompany revenue bond issuances. Those are both strong, those are all strong revenue sources for the city, and that's what's enabled us to maintain the strength of our credit rating and continue to have success in the competitive market that we have. A competitive sale does require an official action of both the council and the issuing authority by way of a resolution to take on the indebtedness, which council has seen those recently. Bond costs, kind of split those into two categories here. Issuing bonds, they're just inherent, what we might call general administrative costs, the cost of issuance, which can run anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000. We have our bonds rated by at least one rating agency, depending upon the type of bond that we're issuing, and in most cases, we go to 2 rating agencies. Differences, I won't take a deep dive, but different rating agencies have different methodologies for which they rate the bonds, so in some cases, it's to our advantage just to rate with 1 as opposed to 2, and we still maintain strong credit ratings and strength out in the market even with just 1 rating. Our esteemed bond counsel does have fees involved. We're preparing all the legal documents and ensuring that we're meeting all the legal milestones that are part of the bond requirements. Within the state of Oklahoma, state law, there are requirements that we publish notices of sale for certain periods of time leading up to the bond sale, and those have to be physically printed in a publication of local distribution, so there's costs involved with that. The competitive sale piece, we utilize an online bidding service to do that, almost kind of equated to the eBay of bond sales. It kind of operates a lot like an eBay bidding. There's costs involved for utilizing that system, purchasing the QSIPs, which are essentially the serial numbers for the bonds. Just the little costs add up pretty quickly. So there are those costs that have to be considered within the structure of issuing the bonds. And then interest costs. I mean, the bonds get repaid and the bondholders receive interest. So we've done some preliminary, just based upon the information that we know and the revenue streams that we're aware of, how these bonds would be repaid. Kind of did some projections on 2 different runs. If we issued $35 million worth of bonds or the full $75 million worth of bonds, and you can see there, the interest costs are up in the millions. And since this is funding, this is sales tax funding, that money that's available from sales tax would repay the principal, interest, and all these costs that you see up here on the screen. So the overall bond costs will reduce the overall project funding availability at the end of the day. So that's certainly a consideration.
I might just mention one thing in connection with that. The amount of money will be reduced that is available up front, not necessarily reduce the overall project funding availability if you're not expecting the sales tax to be there for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So if you don't have the money for 5 years and you're trying to build something today, 5 years from now, it will cost you more. So if it costs you more, your project funding went down anyway. So the question is, what are you using the money for today versus when would you be able to build what you're going to build? And what are the costs of construction or increased cost for that project in the future? And it's really just a math question. If you're paying 3.5% to do bonds and you get to build it today versus you're not paying any, you're not doing bonds, but you're waiting until you collect the sales tax until you have all the money, then you build it 4 years from now, did it cost you more than 3% a year in increased costs? So that's, it depends on what you're gonna use the $35 million for and when you're gonna be able to use it and what costs are associated with that in the future.
And that's a very good point, John, but I wanted to make the distinction that there isn't a separate pot of money for things like interest and cost of issuance. So right off the top, the amount of money that you're looking at, whether it's the cost of money, the time, the increase in construction costs later down the line that's eating into the overall money that you have to spend, or upfront, eating into, you know, these costs taking away. It's not like you've got 75 million plus this extra bank of money that's gonna take care of this funding. It's,
Right.
the principal and interest is funded or is paid for from those revenues, so that there just has to be either the consideration of the cost of issuance up front or the cost of time, just, you know.
Of waiting.
Right, and we know that.
And that's a decision you gotta make.
And we certainly know that construction costs aren't going down, they're gonna continue to go up over time, so that's a great point. Last slide, oh, I'm sorry, not last slide, planning and timelines. Again, kind of focusing in on these first several slides on a competitive sale. Because this would be a new purpose of issuance, where, you know, unlike stormwater, which we've done several issuances of, where there were several vision issuances, this is a new purpose, so we would have to develop new bond documents, which is gonna add a little time to what we would normally plan for a competitive sale. We wanna say 120 days, and that's really start to finish. I mean, from the time that we know what the amount of the issuance is gonna be and when we wanna close and have the money available, we kind of back into a schedule from there and wanna allow about 120 days to make sure that we're covering all the bases. And then the bullet points that you see there are just some highlights of the different things that happen over that 120 days. The official action of the authority and the council, which council has seen again in the recent past. The public notice and publication requirements that I've noted, drafting new documents and bond agreements, getting various opinions of council. There's just, we've got it down to a pretty good science, but there are several interim steps that have to be accomplished. Once the ball gets rolling, the ball is rolling, and we have a pretty tight schedule that we have to stay on. And usually once we get to the date of closing that we've set, funds availability on revenue bonds is a pretty quick turnaround. Generally within 10 to 15 days after we close, funds are available for spending. This is my last slide. The other options are alternative funding options, and I've noted the two that have come up in past discussions that I've been a part of most frequently, which would be a private placement or negotiated sale, which is the flip side to a competitive sale, and bank loans and bank notes. Again, the city has done or been a part of private placement negotiated sales in the past. Tulsa Hills was probably the
Right,
one
so-
that would stand out in recent times as one that was done as a non-competitive sale. The airport council sees those fairly frequently, where competitive sale is waived for bonds that are issued by the airport. And then, but I'll let John kind of step in here and talk through these as a little bit more of a subject matter expert on these.
Right, so generally, like Chad said, the cities and its trust, first thing is to do competitive bid. It's easier, you get good bids for AA rated, AA plus. You get good bids, and then there's no discussion about whether or not the interest rate was correct, because you've got 6 bids, and the cover bid is usually so tight over the winning bid that you know that you had a good market. To privately place a bond means that you're not gonna competitively bid it, you're gonna engage somebody to sell the bonds for you. And the only reason you would do that is if the security behind the bonds were such that it didn't lend itself to competitive bid. So geo bonds are, by law, have to be competitively bid, they're backed by foreign taxes, sales tax, and utility revenue bonds. The city has always done that because somebody in New Jersey understands what water and sewer revenues are. They understand what sales tax are, and you can describe to them what kind of coverage you have on your debt, and they can bid that. If, however, you want to do something for Teo on a TIF, and it's maybe ad valorem tax on one building in downtown plus sales tax on 3 retail establishments. That's not something that somebody in New Jersey is gonna understand without somebody calling them and going through it. So Teo, it would be another entity that probably has to engage somebody to sell those type bonds, and it's because of the security. And if you're a bondholder, if you're going out and buying that, you wouldn't buy that, a Teo bond in Tulsa, Oklahoma, backed by one building, ad valorem tax, and a couple of restaurants, right, without somebody actually going through the process. So that's private placement. And in order to do private placement, the authority issuing bonds and the council have to vote to waive competitive sale, which is provided by statute and done in those situations. Bank loans notes that there's no real difference between doing a bond issue and a note as far as the legal side of it. It's both indebtedness. It's only about who's gonna buy it. And if you do a bond issue and you do an official statement, you're selling that to an institution that's gonna sell that to the public. So we do a 300-page document describing that security so that the bondholder knows exactly what he's getting. If you go into a bank loan, that's a private placement. You're gonna pick out a bank and they're going to do their credit analysis themselves. You are not gonna make representations as to your credit. You're not gonna do an official statement. You're not gonna have a bond rating. But you're gonna go to them and they're gonna do their own analysis based on the bond indenture and the loan agreement that we draft and security agreements that we give. So that means you don't have to do the official statement. You don't have to bond rate. It's a little tighter process, but it is a negotiation with an actual bank. Now, I understand that there's some other options available in this particular, that perhaps there's somebody that wants to do
Well, I don't know.
that.
I mean, we're always open to people giving us money, but I don't know if there are other ones, but I think the questions were if there was an investor or a foundation or someone that was willing to advance loan, what would that process look
Right,
like?
so that would be under a direct loan. Let's say there was a entity that wanted to make this $35 million loan to the city at
2%.
at a lower than market rate. So that would be the first thing that you'd want to consider is that, if it's an entity that says, oh, hey, we're going to make a loan, but it's 8.5%, you probably don't want to go ahead and do that, even though it is charitable, okay? But if it's a 2, then that's clearly well below market and something that you can take advantage of by doing a private placement direct to that entity. Now, you would want to make sure that that entity was an accredited investor, because again, you're not doing an official statement, you're not making any representations to that entity. They're basically saying they've looked at the sales tax and they understand how much coverage you have on this $35 million, and it's considerable. Again, and I know that this committee is probably looking because of housing. It's a $35 million housing. They keep talking about housing bonds. These are not housing bonds. These are sales tax bonds, okay? Because even though you're using it to provide for the housing initiative, none of the housing is going to pay back the bondholder. This is all 100% paid back from the sales tax, which is good for you because if you did rate it, it'd be a AA. Be one click off your AA plus. So it's a very high rating. And even though with Moody's downgrading the U.S. today, maybe they downgrade everybody, I don't know, maybe you're gonna get a click. Because
Does a
basically
click
you're.
mean down? Does it click down?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean,
Is that-
because you're basically rated the same as the U.S.
Oh,
government
okay.
right now.
Okay.
And maybe a little higher, they're AA1 now, and they were AAA, so you're AA1
Yes.
already. So you're rated the same as the United States of America, so. But I think your sales tax is probably in better shape than their budget.
Thank you so much for that. Counselor Ballas, and then I had a short question, but
Yeah, and this might be maybe a Sarah Travis question, but since this item included related to looking at the IoT3 housing funds, and I know we spoke maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about see what we could do to get the, related to potentially like bonding funds or whatever, to get the RFP moving to identify the organization to administer the loan fund and likely the grant fund too. Like, I know there's other, in my head, I'm kind of interpreting that maybe that hasn't happened yet, or is it moving, because we're kind of doing a step 1, step 2, step 3, though I'm wondering if some stuff could be happening concurrently.
I
Are
think
we-
it is envisioned to happen concurrently if the council decides to move forward with a bonding or other
Okay.
process. So the RFP's being drafted,
Okay,
and I think the goal is to have that draft, done pretty soon. But we just don't have a complete draft yet. And
Okay.
then while working on that, now beginning the discussions of how you want to, advance funds or not.
yeah, well, and
So-
I think just one thing I wanted to name, because part of me is like, I know we talked about, hey, we gotta move forward and get like the ball rolling, and that some of this could happen concurrently, like getting this RFP going, because we have to find and vet the place that these, like the dollars are gonna sit, so that we can strategically disseminate them. One of my thoughts is, depending on the nature of the type of organization that we end, like that the RFP ends up selecting and that we end up contracting with, where these dollars sit, I don't know if it makes sense for us to determine all of the like allocations without that organization at the table too at the same time. So I'm just naming that, where if that's like something that we can get moving forward, so that we know who that actual partner is in this work, since we don't know yet. Would love to expedite or get that moving at least, so that we can then strategically, with whoever that partner entity is, make decisions with all of the relevant agencies at the table.
So you're saying move forward with the RFP?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well, that's what we're,
No, okay,
I
it
think a
is.
week or 2 out from
Yeah, the
having
current
that
goal is
draft
early
down.
next week.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
And then we would be moving forward bond-wise to get that.
if the this
If,
is,
yeah.
this is the first discussion the council's
Right.
had, so.
Okay.
We're just trying to not assume that this is the path that the council wants to do, so this is beginning that conversation, so.
So the process, if the council wants to proceed, is
Yes.
really just to let the city know, and then the first thing that would happen is a meeting with TPFA, which would be their next meeting, and then right after that would be approval by the city council, maybe a week after that, so it all depends on timing, but TPFA meets the 4th Thursday in the month, so we could have it on the next agenda. You could address it, at your next Wednesday past that with a committee meeting happening.
That's what I then wanted to
Whatever
check with my
comes through.
colleagues, if that's something we want to start and get moving on.
I had a question, and then, was the question sort of out to the
Yeah,
broader
I was
group
just
to get
checking,
feedback?
where I think we've discussed before, being like, hey, let's get this ball rolling, and I don't wanna, waylay certain things that can help us move forward, so I was just curious if people were like, yeah, let's.
Councilor Lakin, did you
go.
want to respond to that question?
Yeah. I think it's better to have the money now than later, to John's
Do the-
point. The construction costs are likely to go up
Yeah,
over the next 5 years or 10 years. Can't say that with certainty, but it's likely that it's going to happen. Plus,
Yes.
there's just the cost of not having people in homes.
yep,
So which is, you can monetize, I'm sure, in one way, shape, or form, but, it's probably not perfect science either. So, yeah, I would like to say, let's advance fund, or let's find a way to get all the $35 million now, but I would put a wide variety of things on the table.
yeah.
We can look at the competitive bidding thing, we should look at the private placement thing, and then if you can bond it, you can probably bank it. And so I don't know what banks would be out there that would, they have constraints, obviously. I don't know what the market's going to provide versus a bank in a loan where they get CRA credit and other things, may or may not get CRA credit.
Right, I
on some
mean,
of these
if,
things. But we should look at all those things.
yeah, you
And-
can look at all those things, but if there's an entity that wants to
Community
give a
Reinvestment
below.
Act. And I'm not a banker, so I don't know what you have to accumulate or what you're trying to get from a number or credit standpoint, but it's something that
They don't
banks are
comply
very
with it.
focused
There's-
on.
Generally, local banks, there's only one, and that would be competitive versus a negotiated.
Okay.
And they are usually in the negotiated also, so they usually make a bid,
Okay.
because a community bank just has to have a higher rate of return than does, you know, a more national bank or bigger bank.
Yeah.
That's generally what we see. There are national banks that would bid on this, but they're probably not gonna beat the brokerages that bid on it.
Yeah.
So it should be competitively bid unless there is an entity that is here saying, we wanna make this loan ourselves.
What
And
are
that
the-
would be the one, and I don't know who that is, but,
What are the rates right now? What could we expect?
well, it
Is it-
depends on the term, so, I mean, I'm
Yeah, but
thinking
let's
we're
just-
thinking 5 years. Or what- Yeah, so.
What was it?
So it's gonna be a short term, so it's gonna be repaid by the sales tax as collected, so, and they think that's budgeted to be repaid at different times over
Yeah.
the, so it's a 5-year term. But unfortunately, the short rates are still higher than the long rates, so, it doesn't give you as much, but the last was 4.
The last TPFA issuance?
Well, the OWRB did a deal last month, and it was 460. And that was 50%, that was a 50-cent, it was like a 410 for OWRB, so, TWA beats that. They were about like a 3.8.
3.8, and we were
Yeah.
at like 3.7 on.
So I would say
TPFA
for
so
a
far.
5-year deal, I mean, you're looking at, 3.5 to 4%.
Okay.
In there. So if you had somebody that came in and said, well, we'll do it 3.5, well, you probably bid it. If they come in and say, do it 3 or 2.5, then
Yeah, it's different. Yeah.
that's, yeah, because you need to know that if they are coming in and say, we're gonna give you a below interest rate, that it is below interest.
Sure,
Otherwise-
yeah, that's where I was trying
Otherwise,
to
somebody could, oh, well, that was a
just
sweet
predict.
deal for them, they got it,
Yeah.
they did it 3%, boy, they could have gone out and got it 2.5, well, so it has to be that, otherwise you gotta competitively bid it. And
Okay.
since this is sales tax, and since it is, coverage, the coverage is the amount of sales tax that's coming in versus the debt service each year is multiple times, probably 4 or 5 times. I don't even know, 35 million, the coverage is probably 10 times, which means it's a very good credit, and you could competitively bid it.
Would anyone else like to respond to Counselor Bellis's question?
I think that was just also, this is why I'm glad the
Yeah.
Economist weighed in, not the magazine, the person.
Yeah.
No, I did want, like, I know that we have to simultaneously explore what are the actual avenues to use, but
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of how we can do that expeditiously, so it sounds like we're on
Yeah.
the same page.
Yeah, it's easy to go out and get a competitive bid. I mean, you just put it in the
Right.
eBay world, if you will. It's harder to do those private placement things. You have to really go see, let's just say, if there's 10 foundations in the community, which ones would even be willing to do that, given that they can earn, and you just put it in a money market fund and get 4%.
Yeah.
So,
And I'll name
so you
that.
have to be in a very, and they are designed to be charitable, so you have to be
Yeah.
in a very charitable mood with respect to a City of Tulsa housing related project.
Absolutely, and I'll name something that came up, this is now over a year ago, when I was the council representative at the, kind of, it was like the housing strategy leadership round, I don't really know what it was called, but at that table also was ensuring that it was a trusted community entity for people to source, there was like that, like, both like the willingness, like different capabilities, and then also the trust factor as well was heavily named as like what would be a neutral entity that the full community would access, so just a lot of layers, but hopefully, yeah, that's why part of me is like, oh, we better get moving, because there's a lot of considerations.
Yeah, now this would be tax exempt, but I don't know how much that would be beneficial to a 501c3 anyway, or a foundation who perhaps. is
It's
not.
just for the good of the community.
Right, but I mean, it'd be tax exempt, there don't be federal or state tax dues, so it probably wouldn't increase their
return.
their return.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah,
'cause
it doesn't,
they're
they're not paying any taxes.
They're not paying any taxes on it anyway, so.
Two very quick questions. Chad, so when we get the money, does the money sit in the city's account or in the trust's account?
So there's that we establish, there will be a trustee that's, we will actually, since this would be a new purpose, we'd go to bid. We
Well-
would do an RFP, and then trust accounts would be set up at a trustee bank where they actually.
Right, the 35 million or net proceeds would be in a trust account, a project fund, if you will, that would be held by the trustee and be a security for the bonds
Right.
until used for the purpose for which it was intended. So there would be an agreement, and because this is a sales tax backed deal, there's a project agreement from the city to the TPFA on a year-to-year basis, because the city can't enter into anything past this June 30 date. So you'd enter into an agreement saying you're going to transfer the sales tax over to pay the debt service first. And then second, that, there would be a process by which whoever the city determines is going to spend these funds would actually requisition them from the project account. So if there was funds to be used for, this program, then they needed $100,000, they'd sign a requisition, the trustee would pay that $100,000 out. If it was for construction, it would be for those construction dollars. And the thing about this is, and I don't know exactly what we're gonna use the 35 million, there's many things that have been suggested. And the thing about this transaction on the tax exempt side is that since none of the projects that the $35 million are going to have anything to do with repayment of the bonds, this is a governmental issue payable solely by a governmental tax, which means even if you use the money for private purposes, which is intended, it doesn't affect the tax exempt status of the bonds. So even if you were to give this to a private entity and say, go build housing, that wouldn't affect your tax exempt status. So, and the reason you want to do it tax exempt, other than if you sell it to a local foundation, is that it is, 3.5% to 4% versus, 5.75 to 6.25, if you do it taxable. So,
Sarah, are there any, to Councilor Lakin's point and to John's point, are there any foundations that have expressed that willingness to
Nobody's told me that they would
Okay.
be willing to loan us
Okay.
very low interest, 35 million.
Great. All right, any other questions? Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, item number 6, discussion with the Deputy City Administrator for Planning and Performance or his designee regarding the proposed fiscal year 2025-2026 Planning Office budget, including a focused discussion on the anticipated service delivery impacts related to the proposed elimination of positions that are currently vacant.
What an honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wagner, for being
Yes,
with us.
James Wagner, here with Planning and Neighborhoods Department.
Susan Miller, Planning Office.
So before we jump into the focus discussion, I want to real quickly just kind of, I think Susan and I are here really answer 2 questions. I think one is to be specific about how we got to that there's 3 vacancies that are being eliminated in the proposed budget. So how did we get there? And then the service level impact is the part that Susan will cover, and that's the subject of the handout that you're getting right now. So just kind of to fly up a little bit higher to start out, when we started this budget process this year, departments were asked, we need really between a 3 and a 4% reduction in your budgets to be able to get closer to a structurally balanced budget. And so for our department, which was at that time, the Department of City Experience, that was around $500,000. And so if you look at our department's budget, and this is probably actually similar for most departments, it's mostly personnel. So it's, for us, it's about 75% personnel. So that's not uncommon for departments. And if you look at the side of the budget that is non-personnel, it's things like, we have $1 million in our budget for code enforcement abatements. And I think just a couple months ago, we actually added to that because we were getting close to running out of money for code enforcement abatements. So even though we had $1 million for this fiscal year, it was already, close to running out. So I think we appropriated another $300,000 for that. So the other kinds of things that are in the non-personnel budget are things like the mailings that Susan's staff does for the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment, and the yellow signs that go in the, on the lot. Our Main Street contracts are in there. So there's 4 Main Street contracts, so that's part of our non-personnel budget. And then other things like computer software and things like that. So essentially, the non-personnel side of it is mostly kind of like the essential parts of the operations of the department. So when you're looking at a budget reduction of $500,000 for a department of our size, you really would have to eliminate a lot of those things. So like for those examples that I gave, you'd have to eliminate all 3 of those, the latter 3. So that would be all of the mailing costs for the Planning Commission, the Main Street contracts completely eliminated, the computer software completely eliminated. Obviously, you can't do without that. And then you'd have to eliminate about 20% of the abatement costs to get to that number. So what it kind of leaves you with is kind of a situation where you have to start looking at the personnel side. And of course, what nobody wants to do is eliminate any any filled positions. That would be sort of a very last resort. So our proposal to meet this requirement of a 4% reduction was to eliminate some vacant positions within the department. We talked a little bit about this 2 weeks ago. So one of those was the Director of Community Development, which was a vacant position, which we actually kind of absorbed that group into Susan. Part of that group got absorbed into Susan's group, part of it got put into Travis's group. Another vacant position, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, was a code enforcement official, so 1 position there, and then 3 in the planning office, which is what Susan will talk about. So that got us to the mark that we needed to get to in order to meet that requirement. So that's how we got there. I want Susan to talk a little bit about the service level impact, because I think that's the topic of the budget discussion today. And I also just want to say, I think these are budgets are always hard. I've been through this as the finance director several years. It's a hard process. But I think some discipline, in a time like this can really pay off later. And so I think, making sure that we are disciplined in how we do that is an important thing to do. And remembering, a budget is a plan. I think many of us remember Pat Connolly, the former budget director. He would always remind us, the budget is a plan. It's amended on a regular basis. You see those all the time. And so just remembering that as well, that the decisions we make now are things that even we could come back and revisit even during the budget year. So, but Susan, I think, has some important information about the way this will affect kind of the planning office's service delivery, and so I want to turn it over to Susan to talk through that.
Okay, so I'll try not to get into the total weeds, and you guys can ask me any questions in which you want to do that. So I did want to mention, we have in the planning office, and I know feels like most of the people in the planning office, we have kind of 3 groups. I call this Paulina's group. This is the work that her group does. There's overlap in all of it, but primarily this is the responsibility of that group. We have what I call Nathan's group, which Nathan, you're very familiar with what he does, all the zoning subdivision, Board of Adjustment, Team APC, and then Daniel, he kind of oversees our administrative part, special projects, research, things like that. So this is really the part that we would see the impacts on. So try to break these up into categories. It's self-explanatory, really. The red are the things that would be impacted. The green are the things we continue to do. For instance, comprehensive planning. The thing we have to do conformance reviews. We do those all the time, and amendments. Conformance reviews, we do for TIFs, we do for the budget, we do for other projects. amendments we do all the time as they are submitted. Special requests, of course, I'm never gonna say that we aren't gonna do anything that aligns with your or the mayor's priorities. That is, of course, our priorities too. The things that, and it's not on our immediate horizon, but any updates, larger updates to Planet Tulsa, we don't have the staff to do that. Any special land use studies, when we did, for instance, the example I gave with Scenic Hills, that was a zoning change, but also a land use change, and the land use analysis really had was a big contributor to the zoning. And that is sometimes zoning changes that we propose, that land use analysis, because the people in Nathan's group, you know, customer service, it's I call it a hamster wheel. You know, you can't get off. We can write code in that group, but to sit down and do a lot of research and dig deep, sometimes that time is really limited because you have so many customers and projects that you're working on. Also, just sort of one-off projects, things that would respond to certain needs or interests of the community. For instance, right now, we're working on, which I know we have a couple of other of you, we need to talk to about this, Counselor Gilbert and Counselor Dutton. But we've started working on an East Tulsa neighborhood, what are we calling it? East Tulsa Revitalization Initiative with Counselor Bingle. So that type of thing, we wouldn't have the capacity to do that. Also, just Plan 66 update, we did that in the past. Things like that, the one-offs. Strategic planning, that was really the basis of where we came to the Neighborhood Conditions Index. That's just planning through data-driven sort of analysis. So we really landed, Neighborhood Conditions Index we use for a lot of things right now. We used to in the beginning, which some of you may remember, we worked a lot with, at that point it was, well, like engineering services and streets and stormwater, whatever they were called in the past, for prioritization of streetlights based on data and go plan sidewalk gaps. We also did some analysis of locations for the financial empowerment zones. So those types of things we wouldn't have the capacity to do. Plan implementation, I mean, we're fully committed to that. Small area plan and IoT, 3 neighborhood revitalization projects. Things outside of that, like really getting into Planet Tulsa, creating an interface for the public, really doing anything further with that, we don't have the capacity for that. Proposals for future funding packages like the neighborhood revitalization one we put together. Neighborhood programs, this is where we're focused. This is where we're mobilized right now. We did, as James mentioned, we I don't know how to say it, I don't want to say inherited, but you know, the 4 neighborhood planners, those were moved into our group, and they're not planners in the traditional sense to do comprehensive planning work. They're neighborhood liaisons. There's a neighborhood coordinator, I think his title is, and then we got Sam back, our friend Sam, X stands for the Destination District Program. So those were the 4 we received, which really we were already overseeing those neighborhood projects, so it really just put what needed to be back together, because we were already overseeing the development of Neighborhood Academy and all the NCI programs. So that is where the strongest effort is and the most time-consuming effort is right now. The next category is SAM. Is destination districts, and if you know, those of you involved in Route 66, if you know Autumn, those really reflect their 2 duties, their 2 sets of duties, which are, they do a really great job at, and they include a lot of things. The last component of planning that we've really missed, not really in the budget, but in the reorganization, is the urban design function. When we came over here, that was moved into the city design studio. And in the reorg, that position was moved into somewhere else and changed to something else. And so but those duties are still there, and we don't have anyone to do those duties. So that's sort of that situation. So that's sort of the summary, I think, of where we are.
Thank you, Susan. Counselor Bangle.
No, I was
I'm
first.
sorry. Oh, okay.
I wrote it down on your
For
paper
some
before
reason-
the meeting started.
Oh, that's correct.
That
You
was
wrote
like-
that about it.
I
is
asked for this
shocking.
item,
Thank you
I know,
for,
so I did
thank you
it.
for bringing that up.
I know. You weren't even sitting down yet. No, I had asked for this item because I had a lot of curiosities. Because when we first were looking at the budget and the position cuts, I think I might have asked, it might have been James, I'm trying to remember who, and there was kind of that highlight of, hey, the only things in planning that there really weren't available to cut if we're doing cuts across the board were staff, right? And so that really got me curious about what that led to service-wise and so much else. I have just a quick series of questions and then maybe a comment. I'm curious, when you all came over from INCOG, how many like roles did you have there and then lose at that time?
Okay, generally speaking, you don't need a number of people, right?
No, it's okay, yeah,
I'm sure
like
I
what
know
was
that.
like, cause I
But
know it was
so-
one of those, you had X team at
Right.
INCOG, you came over to the city.
Right. When we were at INCOG, the functions that were transferred into other groups outside of planning when we came over here were the urban design planner was moved
Right.
into, if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah.
Was moved into the city design studio, the neighborhood, what we called at that point, the VMP planner and destination district planner, which is SAM, those were moved into community development. Other than
Right.
that, our groups stayed intact.
Okay, and then with the positions that have been vacant that are being eliminated, how long have, you said it was 3, how long have each of those been vacant?
So one senior planner position, which I call the comprehensive planner,
Yeah.
has been vacant since we came. We cannot find the right person, or
And
a
that's what,
qualified
2
person.
years?
Almost 2 years.
Okay.
The other two, the other senior planner's been vacant since last July, that was
Okay.
when Dennis retired. And then a planner position in September.
Okay, so some of those are more recent vacancies, and I don't remember who said this to me, this was like maybe like a year ago, because you guys were actively recruiting for some of those and had gone to like OU and.
We did, we went to OU.
Okay.
We had our career fair, we have.
And you did have applicants for those?
We did have applicants.
Okay.
In fact, well, it's hard to say, because planning community is this
I know,
big,
it's
so
a
we know
niche, yeah.
everybody anyway. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Autumn came out of the, I don't know, anyway, so we met
Okay.
Autumn, we've known Autumn. But anyway, I think somewhere, someone sort of, it prompted them to apply. Oh, it was the career fair we
Okay,
had.
so one was like a somewhat longer standing vacancy, but 2 of them weren't, and you were actively in the
Right.
hiring process for. Just checking, this is just checking. And then, I do wanna flag for my colleagues, like I've observed in our budget that we're adding 2 positions into permitting, taking positions from here. Now, I understand permitting, like we've all been very focused on, but all the concerns I've heard have been very process related, not people power related. And I know that they were actively in the middle of quality improvement and analysis with that department. So to me, I perceive it as a bit preemptive to go, we're gonna add 2 from over here and take from over here. Or I had these concerns about, I don't wanna create a pinch point related to housing or development or other things in the planning office. You know, where like, what if we like help fix the permitting office and then we like create a pinch point at the planning office is like curiosity I have. And then related, so I just wanted to name that as just like this kind of budgetary concern or interest, or that what I've always heard the permitting piece was a process issue, not a staffing issue. Like I'm not 100% crystal clear on that. Okay, that's helpful to know. And then my other, let me pull back up, other inquiry related to some of this, is when I look at all of the red X's, a lot of them are things that we on the council often ask for, like infrastructure prioritization studies, or proposals for future funding package. There's just functionalities within that that are really important, I know, for when we're trying to make decisions or decide if, you know, zoning or a budgetary request or for future capital packages, if those make sense. And I'm curious, since you mentioned with the urban design position, which has been turned into an arts position under the deputy mayor, is that accurate?
It's like an arts and grants position, yes.
Okay.
Public arts.
I'm curious with some of those ongoing programs that were happening, or like, I know there's a lot of coordination with capital improvement projects. So, and you said that there's not staffing to do this scope of work now.
So as far as, so, yeah, for instance, and I know Counselor Leahy and I have talked about this, and in the past, we have reviewed street projects. When the city design studio was formed, I thought we were still getting them, and that kind of fell off, and then I think they started going to the city design
Okay.
studio. So that capacity of planning, reviewing those type of projects, that's gone, and I don't know, we got off of that rotation somehow as well.
Okay, so that means like right now, that responsibility doesn't sit anywhere with anyone?
No.
Can you tell me more, what does that do? Like functionally, or when you were reviewing it, what is that?
So we review from really a planning perspective, we review to, like those sort of qualitative things and walkability as much as we can. So a lot of times we get them at a later stage when maybe the budget has already been too determined. The ideal is that we're at the beginning of the stage before the funding package is ever really put together fully.
Okay, that's helpful. I think this was an upfront question I had when we were starting the budget process. which was knowing the mayor was asking or pursuing through the budget process a certain percent cut across the board, which isn't necessarily ubiquitously across the board from what we've seen, but then we see with departments like this one, where they're like, okay, and I appreciate like James' diligence of going, I'm gonna find a percent to cut, and some of it's gonna have to be disciplined, or there might be pain points. But I do have concerns about if we're just like, hey, we're just like, there were only staff positions, some of which seems like they have functionalities that we do really care about to cut here, that maybe like, it just, I don't know, I just have questions about that across the board approach, when maybe there's other places that could have, spared a little bit more in some places that maybe shouldn't have been cut as much, especially if all that we had as an option here to cut was, some of these staff positions that do roles that, again, I'm just looking at some of the things that are listed that we frequently as a council really do ask for this work to happen, and I feel need it to happen. So I just have some concerns that I wanted to express.
Can I respond to one thing you said
Yeah,
about the
please.
housing pinch point? So one thing that I want to make clear, and it's not really represented well, I think, on this document, is that the current planning, so what Susan referred to as
Right.
Nathan's group.
Yeah, that's there.
That group is not being reduced. And so the machinery, if you will, of like this Team APC and the Board of
Okay.
Adjustment is going to continue as it is and isn't being, impacted by this. With maybe the exception of the land use studies that, Susan talked about, if you're talking about changing zoning codes, but we're talking about getting things through the Planning Commission, getting things through the Board of Adjustment, that's not impacted by this, so.
But I mean, we still ultimately work together. And some of the comprehensive planning efforts, they do go to Team ABC as well, performance review, the amendments, things like that.
Okay.
Great. Counselor Bangle and Lakin, which one of you raise your hands first?
I'll let Phil go
Bengals
first.
first.
I'll let Phil go first.
Okay,
All right.
I will, and I'll go back in the queue.
Okay.
Okay, so on the urban design, should just say this again for me, the arts and grants person, is that person going to assume these urban design roles? Does any of that, I didn't think so.
No.
Okay.
So, let me be a little bit more clear about that. So,
Yeah.
that is an urban design planner, and that person's functions were kind of split between this Parklet and Sidewalk Cafe program
Yeah.
and staffing the Arts Commission. So the Vision Arts part of that person's job
Will
will
go to the arts
continue
person.
with that arts.
Yeah, yeah. But we're still losing the parklet
Right.
and the
Right.
street project review and renderings for project proposals
Correct.
aspect.
That's right.
Yeah, I've said this so many times to so many different people, how important it is to have this, especially for our capital projects. I mean, once the capital projects are in, there's nothing that you can really do.
Yep.
And we can really design things on the front end much more efficiently than we can on the back end. I was deeply involved in a lot of projects, a lot of street projects that occur in my district. And hopefully the outcome has been better. But if we don't have somebody involved, then we just end up with concrete or asphalt streets with maybe sidewalks, but no landscaping, maybe just plain vanilla walls and things like that. Nothing against our engineering department, but we just don't have that the creative element.
Yes.
And the other parts of, other things that go into urban design. So if we were to add this back in, do we have a number? Like, is it a $70,000 or a $50,000 or a $100,000?
I don't have it, but I
Position.
can get it. I don't
Okay.
have it memorized, yeah. It's-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to get that, just because of how important that is. Those street projects are there, we're driving on streets that have been there for decades, and the streets that we put in are gonna be there for decades too. We gotta do it right on the front end. So I'd love to find money for that one in particular.
Agreed.
Counselor Bangle?
Yeah, some of these, which my colleagues have already stated, the proposals for future funding packages, targeted planning initiatives as far as the East Tulsa Revitalization Initiative, which you just started,
Yep.
which,
I mean, we're committing to finish.
yeah, I understand. Cutting positions, and as Counselor Bella stated, you were actively recruiting. I don't want to cut things where we need those. And to me, it's like we know where things are problematic and there might be process issues that we need to refine, especially when it comes to development services and the permitting process of getting folks through that. I don't think throwing more money at a process problem is the fix, especially when we're gonna cut, future development of our city. One of these positions specifically, the City Design Studio Director, retitled Director of Mayor's Office of Public Arts and Community Partnerships. How is this different from what our Arts Board does? What is it they would do that would be much different than what they do?
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak to it in tons of depth, but I mean, this is, so part of that job, the director of the office of, what is it again? Long title. But part of that is staffing the Arts Commission, right? I mean, so the Arts Commission has really never had like a dedicated person to it. You know, there've been people that have staffed it from different departments, but, so it would be that, along with that arts and grants position. But also just really kind of elevating, you know, public art as something that's, you know.
But isn't that what that commission's already doing?
I mean, I guess this is just.
So
a
we're
position
funding
that-
somebody to,
Manage it.
yeah. I don't, that's what I'm saying. It seems duplicative and wasteful, in my opinion. And that's no slight against anybody. Just don't, I want to understand how we're creating a position or repositioning a position, because I thought the city design studio was a great idea when it was created. And now we're just abolishing it, and we're redistributing all these resources, and this just seems duplicative, in my opinion. And that's why I said, from the Arts Commission, I want to know, I kind of want to understand what this position does specifically in relationship to that. Is it duplicative? Is it complementary? I just want to understand it. It just doesn't make sense to me as a position specifically. And when we're cutting positions that have been open for such a short period of time and are purposeful, and now we're going to cut things that are beneficial to the community as a whole, that's problematic to me.
And
So-
that arts position is paid the amount, it's a higher, dollar, the salary is pretty significant relative. I don't have the number off the top of my head.
This just doesn't look right to me.
But yeah.
Looking at both of these documents together, this just doesn't look right to me.
All right. Counselor Dutton? And then,
I think Paul Harper's queuing up. She can go before me.
okay, wonderful. Please, Counselor Dutton, and then Counselor Hall Harper.
Okay, were you first?
No.
Okay, so I'm concerned as well with the cutting of a code enforcement
Right.
position.
There you go.
I
That's what I was
have-
gonna say, but then I want you to go first.
I have heard from so many constituents because of the backlog, and I sent you that email with the list of questions. And so, cutting code enforcement is like cutting our nose to spite our face in that we already have a backlog. And we're going to need, with the apartments and we have 2 code enforcement officers that inspect apartments. I'm not happy with that, cutting code enforcement. What is the backlog?
Yeah, so right now, it's around almost 1,000 cases is kind of where we're at right now. So it grows during the
Right.
growing season. So it gets, I mean, in the past couple of years, it's been up to 2,000,
I heard
you know, something
3,000.
like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where we are right now. To be fair, there's always kind of like a backlog in what we call received status, which is we received it from 311 and haven't been inspected yet. And it's kind of to be expected that there's some backlog. But yes, you're correct, there is a backlog.
And as we progress with that backlog and then we get into the season, it's going to be increased substantially by the time the fall season comes, and then they're going to be having to work to get caught up enough to begin a new spring season. It doesn't sit well with me, cutting up.
And as you know, we're always trying to make process improvements with that as well. So for example, We have just recently changed a policy where we used to, on a property that was a summary eligible property, we would send a code enforcement officer every 30 days to check on those properties. So we've actually stopped doing that, so now we'll still go back if there's a complaint on those properties, but we're trying to redeploy those resources in a smart way to make sure that, you know, the complaints that come in, that they're responded to, rather than just having someone go every 30 days. So we're always making process improvements on that, but yes, there is a backlog, and I think in growing season, there always kind of has been, you know, so yes.
So summary abatement, is it going away?
Summary abatements are still in play, so we can summarily abate a property. That has not changed. In fact, it's expanded, and there was an ordinance recently that
Yeah, I never
expanded
knew
that.
that ordinance on it.
But we had a practice of going every 30 days to check on the properties, and we're not doing that because we were really getting some pushback from property owners who were saying, like, we really feel like we're, you know, being targeted in that way. So we said, okay, well, we can still do a summary abatement, but we're not gonna automatically check on that property for 30 days. We're gonna, if there's a complaint, it will be inspected, and it can be
Just like
abated
normal.
without further notice.
You're just like normal.
Well,
complaint.
except for the time for remedy we've cut out that time for
Okay.
remedy, so that we can abate it immediately, exactly, without another notice and time for remedy, but we're not going by every 30 days, yeah.
So that's where I think a lot of fallout comes from constituents, especially if they're calling in and they're not seeing any sort of response in their minds. They're not seeing the response, and then it just escalates and it gets worse. And so I just, the whole code enforcement aspect, 29 for the entire city of Tulsa is minimal. And I'm also not happy with the East Tulsa Revitalization Initiative. I know you said it was gonna be finished,
Oh, certainly.
but that's for there as well as the.
That's just an example of
Yeah.
a type of.
And the infrastructure prioritization. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Studies, thank you. That's really concerning for me as well, because that is going to affect East Tulsa dramatically, especially with the lack of lights, street lighting. The financial empowerment centers is really important and conducive to helping the community. Yeah.
Is that what you all are thinking about when it says financial empowerment center?
No.
It's gonna be cuts to.
No, that's just and this was several years ago. This is an example of, we did strategic planning, which is our data-driven analysis to determine, like, based on the demographics, the best locations for those centers. So that's a past project. These are just examples, the little
Okay.
unbold italic ones.
Gotcha.
So no, this does not have anything to do with that.
That's good.
Counselor Dutton, are you finished?
Yes.
Okay, Counselor Hall Harper, please.
So I'm seeing under the comprehensive planning and the plan implementation that Planet Tulsa that's our comprehensive plan.
Yes.
Right, so.
And I see X's.
So the first red X is Planet Tulsa update, which that's really not on our horizon to do right now. You know, we had the comprehensive plan, Planet Tulsa updated, or totally rewritten and adopted in '23. So it's still gonna be a few years until we get to that point, but that's something we wouldn't be able to do with the capacity we have now. Land use studies are just, you know, it is part of Planet Tulsa, it's the land use component, so those would be bigger things that we do to support projects. So but, you know, as far as just using Planet Tulsa, we do that all the time. We do it as we review zoning cases, we do it when, you know, we're working with a few TIFs right now that we review against the comp plan. Statute requires that, and amendments.
So just the updating, maintenance, tracking, that part of it, the Planet Tulsa will be cut.
That's right, and yeah, we were in the middle of building an interface with Planet Tulsa to really, I saw some examples of other cities had, that people could go on and understand it and see how it was working and see how they could, you know, understand it or maybe even help implement it. But we had to stop that, we had to kind of focus on other things, but, so that's just not something we can move forward with right now either.
Thank you. All right, and also I would make note, at 1 PM, we'll be talking, we'll have the opportunity to talk more about code enforcement.
Broader projects.
Right, for sure. I have,
Are we over in line? lunch?
Yeah, they're bringing in pizza.
Oh, is that right?
I've been avidly checking, because,
Okay.
I gotta eat for
That's what
two,
I'm
so. I keep being like, is it here yet? Because I will go out and bring it into the room.
So, well,
when it's-
Counselor Bellis and then Counselor Bangle.
Yeah, I did wanna, clarify to my colleagues, as we're looking for, hey, can we figure out especially the, like, significance of some of that more proactive urban design that we don't, it sounds like, wanna go without potentially, that I think, so the classification, sorry, I had to go, like, look this up, / got a slight research assist. That, so I think what happened with that position is, like, right, you had the person who's running the urban design studio, and when they split that up and moved, like, they took that director role and moved it over to this Venus Arts position. And I think because they were seeking to not, like, either they were like, remember they were assuring us during some of that restructure from the mayor's office that they were gonna keep things like one-to-one and no one was losing their job or like pay cuts. So that position's coming in at an EX 52 pay grade, which can be as like, the salary minimum there is 88,000 and maximum is 160,000. And I think they're probably trying to keep that person who had that role compensated to what they've been experiencing within the urban design studio, but it's bringing that in at a high level, which she has subsequently left and works at Housing Forward now, because she's like, I'm an urban design expert, I'm not an arts expert, understandably. But I'm just like naming that, I think, so that's like you end up with that high classification and dollar amount, which I don't know the weeds of then what's needed for either managing arts stuff relative to like this urban design need or salaries there, but yeah, if we can figure out or find that dollar amount, that seems like one of the biggest key missing things, though I do wanna highlight, since Susan also mentioned, related to those infrastructure prioritization studies and some of those other pieces of like the data analytics that would go into determining what's an optimal location for this or that, I would still also worry about losing functionality like that as well, as far as if our city's growing, if we're trying to add in a lot of housing or just doing overall things, it would be really helpful to have that kind of internal analytics be available to make sure that we're actually really doing smart, proactive, just planning overall, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Counselor Bangle.
Yeah, Counselor Dutton hit on a cylinder, code enforcement. As you know, we're working on,
Route
the
66.
centennial, thank you, Phil.
Yeah,
The
that-
centennial for Route 66, and that's one of the priorities over this next year that we've allocated funding specifically for that. We don't wanna put more on your plate than what you can possibly handle. But then we're also asking, as we're doing the mobile vendor education piece, because that's a highly saturated market in our districts, regulating that the way we should have been previously. And you guys are going around and handing out those. And hopefully, we're keeping track of those mobile vendors that we're providing that education to, and especially after the signing of, what is it, House Bill 1076, I think that.
Counselor Bangle,
that-
I just need to interrupt.
What?
So this item's on planning office budget, and so, code enforcement is under James's
Yep.
division, but it's not under planning, and so.
Are we talking about
just-
planning specifically?
Yes, in this item, however, at 1:00, there is a broader budget discussion item, and so I think it would be perfectly appropriate to
code
raise
enforcement.
code
So you're
enforcement
saying
things like
reserve
that.
my darts at James?
Yeah.
I would.
Same target,
invite-
just-
I would invite
Jesus.
to have a piece of
Okay.
pizza and stay for
Yeah.
After we eat.
So all my questions for planning have been answered,
Oh,
so,
wonderful, wonderful. Okay,
gosh, Sarah, mother, may I?
anyone else, any comments, before we move along? Thank you. Well, James is staying around, hopefully.
I am staying, yes.
Appreciate
You want some pizza?
And thank you,
Thank you,
Susan.
Susan.
Okay, item number 7, discussion with the deputy city administrator for planning and performance and the deputy chief of staff regarding the proposed FY 2025-26 budget for the 1921 race massacre graves investigation. But Brentum Todd is here with us. Happy belated birthday to you, sir. And, yes, Mr. Miller, are you gonna be joining us? Oh, okay. What was this again?
Well, I'm Brenton Todd, Deputy Chief of Staff here at the Mayor's Office. Happy to be with you all. And I get a chance to kind of start in this transition of the Graves investigation now that I'm here to continue to move it forward.
Yeah.
James?
So I'll give a real quick kind of recap of where we are with the Race Massacre Graves investigation. So when Rodrigo Rojas left the city last fall, he kind of transitioned this project to me, and then Brenton will be taking on the leadership of it going forward. But I've kind of, for the last 6 or 7 months, really kind of been working with the team of experts that we've collaborated with on this. And so most of the work has been focused in Oak Lawn Cemetery, and we've got a really fantastic team of folks that are very dedicated to this. So it's the archaeology team from University of Oklahoma. The University of Florida has provided Dr. Phoebe Stubblefield, who focuses on the forensic anthropology side of it. We have Intermountain Forensics, who does the DNA analysis and genealogy work to try to extract the DNA and then to make connections with family members. That's how we found C.L. Daniel last summer through that process. And then a contractor that is responsible for the excavation work that really specializes in work in cemeteries where you're doing this kind of work. So as many of you are probably aware, last summer, C.L. Daniel, the first race massacre victim that was found in Oak Lawn Cemetery, we were able to get in touch with his family. His family came and was able to participate in a ceremony honoring him, and now there's a marker in Oak Lawn Cemetery for him. There is still work ongoing for what we call the 2024 season. So the team focuses on they do the excavation, and then they focus on the types of characteristics that would be commensurate with a race massacre victim. So typically those are where you have a plain casket, not a funeralized casket, and so they're looking for those. They're looking for males, and then individuals that would have evidence of trauma. And so when they find those characteristics, they go to the next step to do the DNA analysis, and they're working still, and that's why you see on this budget, we'll get into the budget in just a minute, still some work from the 2024 season. And what that is the DNA analysis and the genealogy work that's being done on the individuals that were found in last year's work. So looking forward to this year, what is the team proposing for this year? There's still a section in the southwest corner of Oak Lawn Cemetery. They estimate that there could be another 28 to 30 or so that are there that they have not excavated yet. And so that's the last kind of portion within Oak Lawn Cemetery that they haven't been able to excavate. And so what's in the proposed budget for this next year includes essentially the excavation. And if you kind of look closely at it, really 3/4 of this is the excavation and reinterment process and the DNA genealogy part. And part of that is because University of Oklahoma, the archaeology folks, we're paying actually a very small portion of what their real costs are because the University of Oklahoma is carrying some of those costs. And so there's a lot of other costs listed there, just kind of to set up the site. It's a very intensive process in terms of all the infrastructure that needs to go into it. There's a trailer that needs to be brought in. There's electrical service that needs to be brought in for that, plumbing and all that sort of thing. Every time that there's a remobilization and demobilization of the work that's going on there. So what's been proposed in the FY26 budget is a $1 million allocation to this to continue this work, to finish what is within the Oak Lawn Cemetery, and also finish the DNA and genealogy work for last year's work. So you'll see that. There's still some remaining funds from last year. You'll see that $286,000 there. And so we're accounting for that, but then adding to it another $1 million to get us to the end of the work in Oak Lawn Cemetery. So that's the kind of the brief overview of what the budget's for.
Thank you so much. Councilor Hall Harper.
So can you explain the Emmett Till grant and how that relates to these funds, if at all?
Yeah.
That's being budgeted?
And Brenda may have to jump in and kind of help me on this part of it. So Yeah, so the Intermountain Forensics is the contractor that's doing both the DNA extraction work and analysis and the genealogy work, and they kind of cross over. So they do some work on the genealogy side here, but they also do the workshops that have been happening just recently, and I think there's still more workshops upcoming. And so they're really deployed kind of on the Emmett Till part of the project, which is funded by a federal grant from the Department of Justice, and from this project as well. And Brenda might be able to say more about what the Emmett Till, folks are working on and what they're planning right now.
Yeah, so for what they've been doing with the genealogy workshops that they've been doing, educating people to continue to submit their DNA to help us with the findings that we are, to be able to get us to a situation like we had last year. They're continuing to do that, and we also know that federal funding for that grant is something that we don't believe, I believe it ends at this fall. And so with that, we are accounting for that work to continue, because the same things that they've been doing will be services that we need to continue to do going forward.
Is there concern, has that entire $1 million grant, have we received that in its entirety, or is there concerns that it will be cut by this presidential administration?
I don't think there's concerns that it would be cut, but I do think there was concerns that it wouldn't be renewed. So it expires in September, and I think.
So was that renewal was for the entire 1 million?
I'm not sure about the,
Are you saying renewed to
Renewed to
continue to receive, because it was $1 million grant, correct?
Correct. After, we're saying after the funding this fall, I believe the funds have to be spent by this fall, or it won't. We don't know that it will be renewed to be able to continue to spend potentially whatever was in there, or if there was.
So we haven't spent the entire $1 million?
No, we have not,
Okay.
not yet.
So there's about, okay, so,
And to be
so the
clear,
Emmett Till grant is mainly genealogy
I
work?
was just gonna say that, yes, it's genealogy,
Okay,
yes.
so that wasn't clear.
So DNA analysis is on this side, on the city side. The genealogy, kind of understanding where the family tree might be, is the Emmett Till side, you're right.
The outreach and all that stuff.
Yeah, so, and then my last comment, so, when all of this began, there was an oversight commission that was in place, and through past administration, and mainly under, you mentioned Rodrigo, that was facilitating this before, they basically just dissolved the oversight committee. It's the now out-of-sight committee. And so I would like to know, or at least have discussions about how we can reestablish that, because there's a large segment of the community that's still concerned about that and hurt by it, the way the administration dealt with that in the community, so.
Counselor Bush, and then Counselor
Pizza.
It's Gilbert.
Gilbert.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that lady.
It smells good anyway.
Counselor, and then Counselor,
Whatever his name is.
No, he needs
I'm
food.
looking at your pizza over
Yeah,
here.
he needs food.
I'm like-
I'll just keep this quick. Since I'm new, give me how long does the grave stuff go on, investigation go on? This is,
Yeah, so.
what's the timeline here?
I mean, yeah, so this would get us through everything in Oaklawn Cemetery. Now, there have been a couple other sites that have been looked at, but the team that is, really kind of looking at this does not have a strong belief that there are graves in those other two locations. And so, Oaklawn, we think is where we will probably, that will be, the extent of it.
Okay.
So, but I will say, like,
I hope not.
every year we do this, you learn something new. And so, like that, I mean, so, it's hard to say, because you don't know what you don't know. And so, until you do the excavation, so,
The small thing I'd add is some of the same kind of initial investigation that they did in the other locations. I'm talking about for down the road. We're looking to complete Oaklawn and reevaluate then, but some of that same initial investigation happened in Oaklawn, and we didn't see what we see now. It's sometimes not until you start digging in certain
Actually
areas where you can actually see there are graves or there are remains that lead us to believe there's continued exploration needed. And we obviously are looking to do everything within our power to make sure that we're fiscally responsible, but also taking care of what we need to
Justice.
try to find what we need to do.
Do you got any follow-up, Councilor Bush?
I have a follow-up to that point,
Please,
though.
go ahead.
So from a historical standpoint, there's a lot of information, witness statements of, as far as where these bodies were located.
Right.
And so that, initially, that's the information that we were using in order to guide where these graves may be. TPD had pictures. We can't find them anymore, right? They said they've looked, find them, but historically, there were pictures of bodies alongside in mass graves along the river. So these places are well-known, but, you know, so I will say, I will take issue with saying, oh, well, once we finish with Oaklawn, we're done. To me, that's just another example of how we just sweep history under the rug and not want to deal with this in a real positive way if we were dealing with other communities in mass graves in the city. So we need to look at the history and be true to what the history has clearly said and not try to hide it. But there was literally, and we talked about this actually in some of our oversight committee meetings when we were having it, there were boxes of photos. Because people were going around taking photos, and the police, again, read the historical documents, they were going around confiscating pictures during this time. And so, again, we're gonna stay true to not only the history of the verbal and written history of what actually happened during that time, but more importantly, the justice for today.
The descendants need to know.
Anybody else would want to know?
I agree.
Councilor Gilbert?
Yes, thank you, Counselor Archie. So I just have a real quick question. So I knew nothing about the grant that Counselor Hull Harper brought up, so it's very interesting, but that it can just be used for genealogy, is that correct? Would a family, where is that, family, the line item, family member travel, could that be
Yes.
considered genealogy? Because, I mean, they are connected, you know what I mean? And so could that fall under that grant as well?
To my knowledge, what we are basing this off of is what happened in the past.
Right, I know.
And so,
But since
As
we're
far
having a
as-
problem spending that $1 million grant, I mean, it sounds like we need to spend it sooner rather than later. I mean, it may be something to just consider. I mean, if that would fall under that genealogy.
I'm not sure if it's in the grant agreement or not.
Okay.
I don't think it is specifically, but.
This family is, I mean, that's what we are. We're all connected by genealogy, so just wondering.
How much of this million of the grant is reflected in these numbers?
None of it.
And that's why I asked the question, because it's unclear to me, and certainly people that's been involved, because I'll just be honest, I was just totally, they just didn't pay any attention to me whatsoever, and didn't give me any information. They just stopped doing that, again, under the previous administration, and so that's why I have these questions. I've seen some stories about the Emmett Till grant, but I'm like, okay, how does this connect? Who is the actually grantee of that? Is it the city of Tulsa?
City of Tulsa, yeah.
So,
Yeah, Kyra
and that's what I'm
Garvey
saying,
is-
I didn't know, yeah.
She's like the person that's administering the grant.
Again, just very little information, and before those, whoever, whether it's Carville, whoever, they just cut us off, and certainly didn't cut me off as far as information, so, thanks for the information. We would even ask for updates, they just stopped coming. Remember, we were asking for quarterly meetings here, updates, and they just stopped coming.
Councilor Bangle,
Right, we go.
and then Councilor Bellis.
Yeah, I remember when GT announced that they had identified C.L. Daniels, and I had sent him a text immediately. Said, we need to have a ceremony for this individual who didn't get their burial right. So I was very proud to facilitate that ceremony. But what was most impactful to me was at that ceremony, the family expressing the fact that they didn't even know they had this existing relative. And that was very impactful to me. So I want us to get through this work and be transparent about it. So that one incident is, I think, just a testament to the importance of this work.
Anything else, Counselor? Okay, Counselor Billis.
Sorry, excuse me, like eating pizza. 8 months pregnant, you know, I couldn't wait. I'm glad that like this was surfaced and Councilor Gilbert also echoed the, like, in just more details related to that Emmett Till grant, and I would be really curious, or maybe we need another agenda item about what's happening with it, making sure that we're getting information and relevant data that Councilor Hall Harper's clearly been asking for with community members. I'm just trying to think through how we can like best potentially leverage that to make sure that there's certain amounts of ongoing work. And then this is just a curiosity, this is maybe more of a historical question, so I'm not sure if we know, but I am curious how much of like the Highway like 75 covers parts of Oak Lawn that would be relevant to, like I know there's other sites, but I'm just trying to think through, or if that's something that like, you know, like GPR, right, that's Grand Penetrator Radar, yeah, like could actually like assess somehow if that's been explored.
Yeah, I mean, that's not included in this budget for this
Right.
year, but, you know, that's what I mean about we don't know what we don't, you know, it's like what
Yeah, we
will be
don't.
the next thing, you know, so.
Well, that's why the oversight committee was disbanded, because those were questions that the oversight committee was asking. And I just didn't think.
So who has oversight of this now?
I mean, it's-
The mayor's office.
Yeah, essentially, it's just been, you know, since Rodrigo left, it was kind of passed on to me. That was the end of the 2024 season, and so Brenda's gonna be taking over the leadership role from the mayor's office perspective, but I kind of been keeping it going for the
And then,
administrative side.
and then does that include the Emmett Till grant, that, is that Kyra Carby that does that still?
It's kind of-
You weren't here, we talked about that.
Yeah, I figured when I was
You
getting
was getting
I missed
pizza,
it. Yeah, I know, I was, just, okay, so maybe is that like a follow-up report we can get, you probably all already asked?
All right. Did you have something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have, because I know we're coming to the close, and maybe I will surface the uncomfortable thing. I said, it's feeling uncomfortable, so maybe I should just say it. I get pushback about this project from some people. They say, mass graves. We found one person over the last, however, what do you define a mass grave as? Why are we spending this money on this project? And they don't quite understand the significance historically.
They don't care.
Or don't care to understand the significance historically, or say, you know, we've given so much money over this amount of time. At what point will we hit the, you know, part of, you know, seeing, you know, mass graves? So the question to you is, what sort of outreach and education are we thinking about to tell the story of why this sort of project is worth tax dollars? Because there is a narrative that I think is important to also consider.
And you don't feel equipped to dispel it?
So I don't want to take, I don't want to presume that I even know all the information. You know, and so it's important to, as a team, to bring the best of our knowledge together.
What I'd say is, from, I believe, me being in a newer seat, and
Sure.
as well, there's newer counselors to this work, and maybe have heard it and seen it ancillary kind of for the last, you know, few years, getting into it and knowing more about what's actually been happening, and just this latest season and what they're finalizing in the report of that. I definitely believe that when we get those updates here in the near future, very near future, I think that will be able to substantiate the importance of the work and why it should continue, and why the experts say this is what we need to continue to move forward for this upcoming fiscal year.
Great.
So
I
think that would
like,
be
one
very
of the genetic genealogists that's on this project attends our church and has texted me about just the team that is working on this. We have an A-class team that's doing the work.
For sure.
And so our ability to maybe even bring some of those folks to the table and to speak about that would be real important. But any other comments or?
Maybe we can buy them some books so they can read.
Is there educational information out there?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, definitely.
Museum too.
Anyone else? Well, Well, please go ahead.
Sarah made a great point. There is a project page on the website that can keep you somewhat abreast of what's happened so far that's been released. And again, as we continue to finalize the 2024, that'll help a lot of this conversation. That'll be updated to the website as well. So if anyone is looking at where we currently are and what's been released to the public, they can go there to see the latest updates.
Okay.
cityofTulsa.org/1921 Graves.
Okay, 1921 Graves. Love it. So thank you all so much. Time for pizza. Item number 8, we are adjourned.